The sun was slipping behind the rolling hills of Riverton when K9 Shadow suddenly locked his legs and sat down in the middle of County Road 12. Gravel scraped under his paws. Traffic had been quiet for hours, but the amber light bleeding across the asphalt made everything feel suspended, like the world itself was holding its breath. Officer Evan Turner felt the jolt through the leash. "Shadow, hey, move!" he ordered, stepping forward. But the German shepherd did not budge. His ears pointed sharply toward the tree line. His chest rose and fell in quick, tremoring breaths. His eyes, usually calm, disciplined, laser-focused, were now wide, alert, and filled with something Evan rarely saw in him: alarm. "Shadow, what is it, boy?" Then Evan saw it. Just 20 feet ahead, half hidden in the ditch, lay a small red bicycle, its handlebars bent, its back wheel still spinning. A soft creaking sound echoed each rotation, like the last whisper of something that had gone terribly wrong. Evan's pulse spiked. A bike that knew didn't end up in a ditch by accident. He knelt, surveying the ground, but Shadow wasn't looking at the bike anymore. The dog's nose lifted into the wind. His body stiffened. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. Shadow turned his head slowly toward a gap in the brush and tugged on the leash with sudden, urgent force, as if the bike was only the beginning. Mornings in Riverton had a way of fooling people into thinking nothing bad could ever happen here. The town sat tucked between two gentle ridges, surrounded by maple trees that burst into gold every autumn. Kids biked to school. Retirees waved from their porches. Dogs dozed lazily behind white picket fences, and for Officer Evan Turner, it was a place where he hoped danger would stay small, manageable, after years of harder assignments. He had returned to duty barely a month earlier, after a shoulder injury that took him out of the field for 8 long weeks. The one who had missed him most was Shadow, his K9 partner of 4 years. The German shepherd had spent those weeks pacing, waiting at doors, whining when Evan wasn't there. The bond between them didn't feel like a partnership. It felt like something older, deeper, built on shared breath in tense moments and silent understanding in the dark. Shadow was 6 now, in his prime, with a coat that shimmered like burnished bronze under sunlight. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, always analyzing more than any human could sense. Evan sometimes joked that Shadow could probably run the whole precinct if someone would just let him type. That afternoon had begun uneventfully. A routine patrol, clear skies, dry roads. Evan had rolled down the window to let the breeze in while Shadow sat upright in the back seat, nose high, as if reading every scent the day carried. At 5:12 p.m., dispatch sent them to check a quiet stretch of County Road 12. Reports of a wandering coyote. Nothing urgent, probably nothing at all. Evan didn't mind. It felt good to be back behind the wheel, Shadow's presence steady and familiar beside him. The world drifted by slowly. Golden fields, rust-colored barns, a distant water tower shimmering in the heat. Then something shifted. Shadow leaned forward, muscles tightening. His ears rotated sharply toward the right, catching something Evan couldn't hear. A subtle vibration seemed to travel down the leash as Shadow's breathing changed, shorter, quicker. "You good back there, buddy?" Evan asked, glancing in the mirror. Shadow didn't blink. Seconds later, as they approached a bend in the road, Shadow suddenly lunged forward, nose pressed to the crack of the window, letting out a short, urgent bark. By the time Evan hit the brakes, Shadow had already made his decision. He jumped down from the back seat, pulled the leash taut, and sat in the middle of the road, refusing to move. To Evan, it was like watching instinct take over. There was no hesitation, no doubt. Something was wrong. Shadow felt it long before Evan did, and within moments, Evan would see the red bicycle in the ditch and realize this day was about to unravel in ways he never imagined. Shadow moved through life as if every sound left a footprint, every scent carried a story, and every shift of wind whispered a warning. To most officers, the quiet stretch of County Road 12 was just another slice of rural Riverton, but to Shadow it was alive, pulsing with signals that only he could read. Evan watched him closely, noticing how the dog's posture had transformed. A few minutes earlier, Shadow had been relaxed, tongue lolling, content to ride along. Now his chest hovered inches above the asphalt, muscles coiled like springs beneath his fur. His ears flicked toward the brush, capturing frequencies no human ears ever could. The faint crack of a twig, the rush of disturbed leaves, a distant vibration carried through earth and bark. Shadow lowered his head and inhaled deeply. Not just a breath, but a process, a breakdown, a decoding. Evan had seen that nose pick up survivors buried under collapsed sheds, missing seniors miles from home, even narcotics hidden inside metal containers. But what struck him now was the tension rolling under Shadow's skin, something primal, instinctive, a sense of threat sharpened to a needlepoint. "Shadow, talk to me, buddy," Evan whispered, though he knew Shadow's language came in other forms. The twitch of a whisker, the flare of a nostril, the subtle shift of weight from paw to paw. Shadow's eyes, amber and steady, shimmered with a depth that always surprised Evan. They moved slowly, scanning the tree line not for movement, but for intention, as though he could feel the residue of fear lingering in the air. Then Shadow stood. No hesitation, no confusion, just purpose. He stepped toward the ditch where the red bicycle lay twisted among weeds. His nose hovered inches above it, following invisible lines of scent that spiraled outward like threads left behind by whoever last touched it. But Shadow didn't linger on the bike. Instead, he angled his head toward the wind, ears tightening into a hard forward point. His paws shifted in the dirt, pulling Evan toward the wooded area, as if the bike was merely the first sentence of a story written somewhere deeper in the trees. Evan followed the tension on the leash. "What are you picking up? Animal? Injured kid? Something else?" But Shadow wasn't searching for an animal. His tail lowered, straight, stiff. His breath changed again, short and hot. This was danger, not the sudden type that explodes, the slow, lingering kind that lives in silence. Shadow took a few deliberate steps off the road, pushing aside branches with his muzzle, moving with the stealth of a creature who understood his role, not just a tracker, but a shield. As they entered the first layer of brush, Evan felt the temperature shift. The golden sunlight dimmed, swallowed by tall pines that whispered above them. Dust motes floated in the air like suspended warnings. Shadow stopped again, not to sit, this time to listen. His head tilted, his breathing steadied. One paw lifted slowly, hovering midair. And then he moved, quick, decisive, into the darker part of the woods, tugging Evan with a force that left no room for doubt. Something, or someone, was out there, and Shadow had already chosen to find it. The forest swallowed the last of the evening light as Evan followed Shadow deeper into the trees. What had been warm, golden air just moments before now shifted into something cooler, heavier, almost watchful. The crunch of dry leaves under Evan's boots seemed too loud, too sharp against the hush of the woods. Shadow moved ahead slowly but with purpose, his nose sweeping low, then high, then low again. Each breath he pulled in felt measured, deliberate, as if he was sorting through invisible threads only he could sense. His tail stayed locked downward, a sign every canine handler understood. This wasn't curiosity, this was concern. A few yards in, Shadow paused so abruptly Evan nearly stumbled into him. "What is it, boy?" Evan whispered, lowering himself to Shadow's level. Shadow leaned forward, pressing his nose into a thin patch of dirt near the base of a leaning oak. Evan followed the dog's gaze and spotted them, small footprints, barely more than indentations, the kind only a child's sneakers would make. They were scattered, uneven, as if whoever made them had been running, or stumbling. Evan's throat tightened. "Kid's hurt," he muttered. "Or scared." Shadow sniffed the prints once more before his ears flicked sideways. A sound, so faint Evan almost missed it, rustled through the underbrush. Not wind, not an animal's cry. Something else. A brush of fabric, a gasp, or maybe the echo of something that had already happened. Shadow lifted his head and let out a low whine, the kind that vibrated more in the chest than the throat. Evan felt it in his bones. Then Shadow stepped aside slightly, revealing something half buried beneath the dry leaves. A shoelace, bright blue, caught on a jagged piece of bark at the edge of the oak. The end of it was torn, frayed, ripped, not untied. Evan's heartbeat hammered. This wasn't just a fall. This was struggle. Shadow nudged the shoelace gently, then looked back at Evan, eyes wide, shimmering with an almost human pleading. "We're losing time." Just as Evan reached for his radio, a sudden shift in Shadow's posture made him freeze. The dog's shoulders stiffened, his mouth closed tight, his nostrils widened, pulling in a scent that electrified every nerve in his body. Shadow growled, not loud, not violent, but deep, a subterranean hum that seemed to ripple through the ground itself. Evan slowly stood, scanning the shadows. "Is someone here?" he called out softly. His voice seemed to vanish before reaching the trees. Shadow took 2 steps forward, then suddenly jerked left, as if the scent veered sharply. His paws dug into the earth, pulling Evan toward the darker, denser part of the woods. Evan barely had time to react. Shadow was already lunging deeper into the brush, the footprints, the torn shoelace, the frightened air. Everything pointed to one truth. The child hadn't simply disappeared. Something, or someone, had taken him further into the trees. Shadow knew it first, and the forest was only starting to give up its secrets. Shadow pulled Evan through a thicket, where the trees grew closer together, their branches weaving into a canopy that swallowed the remaining daylight. The air felt denser, colder, as if the forest itself were holding onto a secret it didn't want to release. Evan brushed aside low-hanging branches, the bark scratching against his sleeves as he struggled to keep up with Shadow's urgency. "Easy, boy. Slow down," he murmured. But Shadow didn't slow. His nose traced the earth with precision, an invisible map unfolding under every step. He stopped only when the ground sloped sharply downward, forming a shallow ravine. Evan slid carefully, planting his boots into the soft dirt, steadying himself on trunks and branches. Shadow reached the bottom before him, then froze. A new scent had hit him. He lowered his head, breathing in fast, sharp bursts. Then he stepped aside, revealing something the forest had tried to hide. A line of disturbed soil, dragged in an irregular pattern. It wasn't the soft, skipping indentations of childhood play. It was heavier, forced, a pull. Evan crouched, running his fingers along the groove. "Someone dragged something," he whispered, "or someone." Shadow let out a tense whine. Before Evan could radio it in, Shadow's head snapped up, ears pointed, body locked. A breeze pushed through the trees, carrying with it a sound that made the hair on Evan's arms rise, a faint, broken cry, too soft to echo, almost swallowed by the woods. Shadow? Was that a kid? The dog had already bolted up the opposite slope. Evan scrambled behind him, grabbing roots, using branches as anchors until he reached the top. The ground leveled out into a clearing of ferns and scattered stones, and there, pressed into the soil like a desperate message, were more signs. Footprints, small, erratic. A smear of dirt that looked like someone had fallen, and a handprint, a child's handprint. Evan felt his breath leave him. "Lucas," he whispered, the missing boy's name slipping out before he could stop it. Shadow walked in circles, nose sweeping, paws kicking up dirt. Every few seconds he stopped, pointed, then changed direction, like the forest was filled with conflicting signals of fear, panic, movement. Then he stiffened. His tail straightened. His ears locked forward. He lifted one paw and held it there, the unmistakable alert signal every handler knows. "Shadow, talk to me." Shadow inhaled deeply, then turned his head slightly, staring toward a cluster of dense undergrowth, thicker, darker, as if light refused to enter it. Evan felt the shift. Something was there, something watching. And Shadow had just found the door leading deeper into the truth no one was ready for. Shadow approached the dense undergrowth with the caution of a creature who understood that danger didn't always roar. It often hid in silence. His steps grew slower, more deliberate, each paw landing without a sound. The leaves barely moved under his weight. Evan followed several feet behind, keeping his breath shallow, his eyes scanning every shadow. The forest had changed. The wind no longer rustled freely through the branches. Instead, it moved in short, hesitant pulses, like it was unsure whether to push forward or retreat. The light dimmed further, filtered through tangled foliage that seemed to close in overhead. Even the birds had gone quiet. Shadow halted, his head angled toward the ground, nose hovering over a cluster of flattened weeds. Evan stepped closer and saw it. Scratches carved into the bark of a fallen log, 5 thin lines, the height of a small child's reach. They were fresh. Splinters still hung loose where tiny fingers had clawed desperately. Evan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "Lucas, you were here," he murmured. Shadow shifted to the left, lowering his body as he sniffed a patch of soil. Then he followed an invisible line to a nearby bush. Evan circled to see what the dog had found, and his breath caught. A small glove, blue, damp from the soil, its fabric torn near the wrist. Evan picked it up gently. Oh God, kid lost both gloves. Shadow pawed at the earth beside him, then stepped back, turning his gaze toward the woods beyond the bush. His body language had changed again, less searching, more anticipating, like he knew the trail was about to reveal something crucial. Then the wind shifted. A new scent hit Shadow, strong enough to jolt him upright. He growled, the sound low, rolling, vibrating through the ground. His fur rose along his spine, a ridge of bristling instinct. Evan stiffened. "What do you smell?" Shadow glanced back briefly, his eyes burning with urgency, then sprang forward through a break in the brush, pulling Evan with him. Branches slapped against Evan's arms as he pushed through, stumbling to keep pace. The clearing they stumbled into was strangely open, as if the trees had been forced apart. Leaves lay scattered in chaotic patterns. Dirt kicked up in arcs. Something, or someone, had moved violently through here. Evan scanned the ground and froze. Tire tracks, fresh ones, wide, heavy. Not a bicycle, not a maintenance cart, a truck. Shadow's nose pressed against the tracks, breathing in harsh bursts, his body shaking, not from fear but recognition. Whatever took Lucas had wheels, and it had been here very recently. Shadow looked up, eyes locked on Evan with a message clearer than words. They weren't chasing a lost child. They were chasing whoever had taken him. Shadow lowered his nose to the ground again, inhaling in short, clipped bursts, the kind he used when the scent he followed wasn't just fresh, but urgent. The German shepherd's entire body vibrated with tension. His paws shifted rapidly, tracing the outline of the tire tracks, then veering left, where crushed ferns formed a broken path. Evan knelt to inspect the tracks, wide tread, deep impressions. "Pickup truck, maybe a work truck," he muttered. "Big, heavy load." Shadow didn't wait for analysis. He jerked the leash, pulling Evan toward the left side of the clearing, where the earth dipped into a narrow corridor of trees. The air grew colder there, stiller, as if even the wind refused to enter. Shadow stopped at the edge of the corridor. He stared forward, unmoving. Evan swallowed hard. "You smell him, don't you?" Shadow's ears twitched. Then he stepped forward, and the forest seemed to darken around them. The ground was soft here, coated in mud and fallen needles. As Evan followed, he caught sight of something half buried under the debris, the faint outline of a knee print, small, angled inward as if someone had stumbled. Next to it, a deeper indentation, a boot print, larger, heavier, adult. The two prints overlapped in a way that made Evan's pulse throb. The child hadn't been running alone. He'd been pushed, dragged, carried, something violent, something frantic. Shadow sniffed the deeper print and let out a sharp bark, sudden and explosive. Evan flinched. "Shadow! Quiet!" But Shadow barked again, louder, the sound bouncing off the trees. His body stiffened, fur standing up in a dark ridge along his spine. That was the alert bark, not for danger, for presence. Someone had been here, recently enough that the scent felt alive. Evan tried his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Turner. I have possible abduction evidence on County Road 12. Need backup, tracking suspect, and missing juvenile." Static, a crackle, then nothing. The signal couldn't break through the thick canopy. Shadow didn't care. He plunged deeper into the trees, forcing Evan to jog to keep up. The corridor narrowed until the branches scraped Evan's shoulders. Every sound felt amplified, the snap of twigs, the crunch of boots, the distant thrum of water somewhere unseen. Then Shadow stopped again, head tilting upward. A drop of red clung to a low-hanging branch. Just one, but bright, fresh. Evan's stomach dropped. "Blood," he whispered. "Lucas, he's hurt." Shadow nudged the leaf, then turned sharply to the right, heading toward the faint sound of running water. Not rushing, not loud, just steady, like a creek, or like something being washed away. Shadow moved faster now, almost frantic. Whatever they were about to find, Evan sensed one chilling truth. They were no longer behind the trail. They were just steps away from the person who made it. The sound of running water grew louder as Shadow tore through the last wall of underbrush. Evan followed close behind, breath sharp, branches whipping against his sleeves. The trees parted abruptly, revealing a narrow creek winding through the forest like a silver ribbon. Its surface shimmered with the last sliver of dying daylight. Shadow stopped at the edge of the bank. His nose dipped low, his tail froze. His entire body locked into a rigid stance Evan knew all too well, the point of discovery. Evan slid to a halt beside him. At first he saw nothing but the stream gliding over smooth stones. Then his eyes caught it, a smear of brownish red diluted in the water, trailing down from a cluster of rocks. He stepped closer, crouching low. The stain wasn't old. The water hadn't had time to pull it apart into nothingness. Shadow's growl began as a quiet tremor, barely audible over the creek, but it deepened, growing louder, vibrating through the ground under Evan's boots. Something else was here. Following Shadow's stare, Evan's eyes landed on a discarded object wedged between two stones, a small plastic flashlight, its casing cracked. A cartoon astronaut sticker clung to the side, peeling at the edges. "Lucas's," Evan whispered. "His mom said he carried this everywhere." Shadow pressed a paw onto the dirt near the waterline. That was when Evan saw it. Impressions in the mud, half-washed, but still distinct. Two sets, one small, one large, both angled toward the opposite side of the creek. Evan felt his stomach knot. "They crossed here," he murmured. "Someone carried him, or he was forced." But Shadow wasn't looking at the creek anymore. He was staring at something just beyond it, something nestled at the base of a rotting stump on the far side. Evan squinted. A rope? Frayed. Torn at one end, not a random piece of forest debris. A restraint. Evan stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, his hand instinctively reaching for his holster. Shadow moved ahead, lowering into a stalking crouch, ears pinned forward like arrows. Then, from somewhere deeper in the woods beyond the stump, a sharp metallic bang erupted. Not natural, not accidental. Shadow lunged forward, barking with explosive force, the sound ripping through the stillness like a warning shot. Evan's heart slammed into his chest. "That wasn't an animal," he muttered. "Someone's here." Shadow's bark shifted, a different tone now, one Evan had only heard twice in his entire career, the alert for a human threat. The truth was no longer hidden. Someone wasn't just passing through this forest, someone was waiting. Shadow hit the creek first, splashing through the shallow water with a force that sent droplets flying like shards of glass in the dimming light. Evan leapt after him, boots plunging into the cold stream, breath ragged as he followed the dog up the opposite bank. The metallic bang echoed again, closer this time. Not an echo, not a coincidence, a signal. Shadow bounded forward, but as he neared the rotting stump, he slowed, nose twitching violently. His growl deepened, then softened into something more chilling, a quiet, guttural rumble that spoke of both warning and fear. Evan scanned the tree line, and then he saw movement. A shadow slipped between the pines, tall, broad-shouldered, clothing dark, mottled. Not a hiker, not a hunter, a man. "Police, let me see your hands," Evan shouted. The figure didn't respond. Instead, he turned, just enough for Evan to catch a glimpse of his face, eyes hollow, cheeks gaunt, expression unreadable, and then the man bolted deeper into the forest. Shadow launched after him with a bark so sharp it cut the silence in half. "Shadow, heel, wait," Evan commanded. But instinct overrode training. Shadow knew what Evan didn't yet. The man wasn't running away. He was running back towards something he left behind. Evan raced after them, dodging branches and leaping over roots. His flashlight beam jittered wildly across the trees as the forest thickened again. Shadow wove through the darkness like a streak of molten copper, closing the distance with every stride. Suddenly, the man stumbled, just for a moment. His foot caught on a buried root, enough to break his rhythm. Shadow seized the opportunity. He lunged, teeth bared, jaws locking onto the man's pant leg. The man crashed to the ground, kicking violently as Shadow held firm. Evan sprinted toward them, drawing his firearm. "Don't move!" The man swung something from his belt, a tool, metal, jagged, aimed not at Evan, but at Shadow. "No!" Evan yelled. Shadow dodged the first strike, but the second came fast, glinting through the dusk. Before the blade connected, a faint voice cracked through the air. A child's voice. "Help!" Evan froze. Shadow froze. Even the man hesitated. Somewhere beyond the trees, somewhere nearby. A child was crying, breathing fast, weak, terrified. Lucas was alive and close. So close that Shadow's ears shot upward, head whipping toward the sound. The man realized it at the same time and tried to scramble away, but Shadow was already choosing protect the child, stop the threat, do both, whatever it took. This wasn't a chase anymore. This was a rescue. And Shadow was done holding back. Shadow didn't wait for Evan's command. The moment Lucas's faint cry trembled through the trees, something ancient and instinctive lit up inside him. Not aggression, but duty. His muscles coiled, and in a single burst he lunged at the fleeing man with a force that sent both of them tumbling across the forest floor. "Shadow, get back!" Evan shouted, sprinting after them. But Shadow wasn't listening. He couldn't. Not now. The man staggered to his feet, swinging the jagged metal tool wildly. Shadow dodged left, then right, snapping at the man's sleeve, forcing him back, away from the direction of the child's voice. "Stay away from me!" the man yelled, stumbling as Shadow drove him back with a furious bark. Evan reached the clearing's edge, gun raised, breath sharp and fast. "Don't move! Drop the weapon!" The man didn't drop it. He lunged, straight at Shadow. The metal flashed. A whistle of air, and Shadow barely twisted aside before it struck the ground where his head had been. But the second swing came faster. The blade clipped Shadow's shoulder, a shallow slice, enough to draw blood, enough to make Shadow yelp. Evan's heart plunged. "Shadow!" But the wound only fueled the dog's resolve. Shadow lowered his body, teeth bared, growl deepening into something primal, a sound born from loyalty, from training, from love. The man swung again. This time, Shadow didn't dodge. He met the attack head on. He lunged upward, clamping his jaws around the man's forearm, twisting with precision, using his weight to drag the man sideways. The weapon flew from the attacker's hand, clattering against a stone. The man screamed, collapsing under Shadow's strength. Evan finally closed the distance, slamming the man to the ground and resting his other hand behind him. "Don't move! Hands where I can see them!" But the forest didn't calm, because as Evan clicked the handcuff shut, Shadow turned sharply, ears locked, body rigid. He heard something, a weak sob, a muffled plea. "Please, help!" Lucas. Shadow took off into the dark before Evan even looked up. He wasn't running blindly. He was running straight toward the child, and toward whatever danger was still waiting there. Shadow tore through the trees like a streak of living fire, his paws pounding the earth, breath sharp and rhythmic. The faint cries grew louder, not screams, just broken whimpers, the kind a child makes when he's too exhausted to call for help anymore. Evan raced behind him, heart hammering, flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. "Shadow! Wait for me!" But Shadow couldn't wait. Lucas didn't have that kind of time. The forest opened into a narrow ravine choked with boulders and fallen logs, and there, wedged between two slabs of rock, was a small figure, mud-covered, bruised, hands bound, face streaked with tears. Lucas. Shadow skidded to a stop, lowering his body and crawling toward the boy with trembling gentleness. His growl vanished, replaced by a soft whine that vibrated with relief and urgency. Lucas's eyes fluttered open. "Shh, help," he whispered. "He said he'd come back." Shadow pressed his nose to the boy's cheek. "A promise? You're safe now." But safety lasted less than a heartbeat. A sudden crash ripped through the trees behind them. Branches snapped. Footsteps thundered. Evan spun around. The man, the suspect he had handcuffed, was somehow back on his feet, dragging a broken branch like a club, eyes wild with panic. "Get away from him!" Evan shouted. The man didn't listen. He charged. Evan raised his weapon, but the angle was wrong. Lucas was directly behind the attacker. If he fired, even one mistake could end the boy's life. Shadow understood that faster than any human mind could calculate. He exploded forward, not away from danger, into it. He slammed into the man's torso with enough force to knock the breath from his lungs. The blow sent both of them tumbling down the slope. The man swung the makeshift club wildly, striking Shadow across the ribs. A cry tore from the dog's throat, raw and pained, but he refused to let go. He clamped onto the attacker's coat, anchoring him, dragging him away from Lucas even as the strikes kept coming. "Shadow! Shadow! Get back!" Evan shouted, scrambling down after them. But Shadow wasn't fighting for orders. He was fighting for the boy, for Evan, for the truth he had followed since the moment he sat down in that road. A final blow landed. Shadow's legs buckled. His chest hit the dirt. But he did not release the man. And that last act, holding on despite the pain, gave Evan the opening he needed. Within seconds the man was subdued, cuffed, face down in the dirt. But Shadow wasn't getting up. "Shadow!" Evan's voice cracked as he dropped to his knees beside the fallen K9. Shadow lay on his side, chest heaving in shallow, uneven pulls. Dirt and blood clung to his fur, matting it in dark streaks. His eyes, usually sharp and alert, blinked slowly, struggling to focus. "It's okay, boy, I'm here," Evan whispered, one hand trembling as it found the dog's neck. "Stay with me." Lucas whimpered from above the ravine, still tied but alive, watching with wide, terrified eyes. "He saved me," the little boy whispered. "He saved me again." Evan's throat tightened. "I know, buddy. He did." The forest buzzed with noise now. Sirens in the distance, officers calling out coordinates, paramedics rushing toward them. Flashlights carved through the trees like white comets. 2 officers lifted Lucas gently, wrapping him in a blanket. The child clung to the flashlight Shadow had found earlier and refused to let go. "Is the dog okay?" Lucas asked, tears streaking his dirty cheeks. Evan swallowed hard. "We're going to help him, I promise." Shadow let out a faint whine, nudging Evan's wrist with his nose, weak but purposeful. A message. I did my part. Stay with me now. Evan pressed his forehead lightly against Shadow's. You're not leaving me, you hear? Not tonight. The paramedic team for animals, a specialized unit from the county, arrived with a stretcher. They moved quickly, their faces tight with focus, assessing Shadow's wounds. Fractured ribs, deep bruising, cuts along his side, signs of internal stress from impact. He needs immediate veterinary care, one medic said. If we move fast, he's got a real shot. Evan refused to let go of Shadow's paw, even as the stretcher lifted, his grip only tightened. Hours passed in the fluorescent glow of the Riverton Veterinary Emergency Center. Officers filled the waiting room. Lucas's mother arrived, sobbing, hugging Evan repeatedly. Reporters gathered outside. The town felt suspended in one long, breathless moment. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the vet stepped out of the operating room, pulling off her gloves. He's stable. The entire room exhaled at once. He's not out of the woods, she continued gently, but he's fighting, and he has a reason to. Evan wiped his eyes. Yeah, he does. Later, once allowed inside, Evan sat quietly beside Shadow's recovery bed. Tubes and bandages covered the dog's torso, but his breathing, though slow, was steady. When Evan placed a hand on him, Shadow's tail thumped faintly against the blanket. Good boy, Evan whispered, voice shaking with relief. You're coming home. And in that soft, exhausted moment, the truth settled over the room. Shadow hadn't just saved a child. He had saved an entire town from the darkness hiding in its own woods. 2 weeks later, Riverton woke to a morning washed in soft gold, the kind of light that felt like a blessing after a long storm. The town square was unusually crowded for a weekday. Families, officers, retirees, even the mayor gathered near the courthouse steps. A banner fluttered above them. Welcome home, Shadow. Evan stepped out of the patrol SUV carefully, opening the rear door with hands that still trembled slightly, not from fear, but from gratitude. Shadow emerged slowly, his gait steady, though gentler than before. A shaved patch marked his side where stitches still lay, but his eyes glowed, alert, alive, unbroken. The moment he touched the pavement, the crowd erupted into applause. Phones lifted, kids cheered, some adults wiped tears. But Shadow didn't look at them first. His gaze swept the crowd until he spotted a small boy sitting on a blanket at the very front. Bandaged wrists, healing bruises, but safe. Lucas. The boy stood on unsteady legs as Shadow approached. For a heartbeat, the entire world hushed. Then Lucas knelt and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, burying his face in Shadow's fur. Hi, buddy, he whispered. I knew you'd come back. Shadow's tail lifted, wagging softly, pressing his head into the child's shoulder with reverent tenderness. A sound like a sigh passed through the crowd. Evan watched with wet eyes. Never seen anything like it, an officer beside him murmured. Me neither, Evan replied quietly. He just knows. When Lucas's mother approached, tears streaking her face, she knelt beside her son and looked up at Evan. How do you thank someone who saved your child twice in one night? She asked, voice trembling. Evan smiled gently. You don't have to thank him. He chose this. He always would. The mayor stepped forward then, holding a small medal engraved with the town seal. She clipped it gently to Shadow's collar. The dog sat perfectly still, as if sensing the solemnity of the moment. Shadow, she announced, voice ringing through the speakers, you reminded us all that heroes come in many forms. Some wear badges, some wear fur, and some save lives because their hearts will not let them do anything else. Thunderous applause filled the square. As the sun rose higher, Shadow lay down beside Lucas, resting his head on the boy's lap. The breeze lifted softly, carrying petals from the nearby dogwood trees, scattering them around the pair like blessings. A peaceful silence settled over Riverton, a silence that felt full, grateful, whole. Shadow had followed a truth only he could sense, and because of that truth, a child lived, a town healed, and a bond deeper than words was carved into their story forever. Some stories remind us that courage isn't only found in uniforms or medals, it's found in the quiet heartbeat of a companion who refuses to look away when danger rises. Shadow didn't save Lucas because he was trained to. He saved him because loyalty lives deeper than commands. Because love, in its purest form, runs on instinct. And maybe that's the lesson we're meant to carry with us today. Not all heroes shout. Not all heroes stand tall. Some heroes walk on four paws, and they choose us long before we ever choose them. If this story touched your heart, we'd be honored if you stayed with us a little longer. Please like, share, and subscribe, and help us tell more true and heartfelt stories of the animals whose instincts save lives, mend broken places, and remind us what real courage looks like. Because here, on Pawprints of Valor, every heartbeat has a purpose, and every pawprint has a story.